Hello and welcome to another episode of the Noizze podcast as part of the Noizze Podcast Network and sponsored by Stereo Brain Records. Today, me and Jack will be discussing the new album from Joe Appleford, a debut from a fantastic singer-songwriter. And then me and Jack will also be discussing the new album from Heilung, a band that I won't even try and describe to you. You just need to listen to what we say about it. Later on, I'll be discussing Joe Appleford's new album with Joe Appleford as well. And talking about lots of stuff, including his songwriting style, influences, and all that good stuff. Okay, thank you so much, and enjoy the podcast. Please make sure you follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast Network, at Noizze UK. Follow us, like, and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify and all that good stuff. Please follow us on every available social media, new and old. All right, thank you so much. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Noizze Podcast Network, brought to you by Stereo Brain Records. I'm joined once again by kind of my boss, kind of my friend, kind of my peer, associate, degenerate, and psychiatrist. Jack, how are you, sir?
Tuesday, when I'd had the busiest day, even by my standards, and just wasn't in the headspace, was already feeling defeated and like I wasn't going to be able to do the podcast, and then walked out from having just this full-on day in work and everything else to just a text from you, or a number of texts from you, just explaining exactly why we weren't going to do the podcast and why validating all of the feelings that I felt. So yeah, I'm just blowing smoke up your ass because you were an excellent friend on Tuesday, and that was needed. It was the first thing I looked at when I came out of work very late, and that was amazing. So thank you. Today I'm probably more fraught than I was yesterday, albeit less headachy and tired. And I've just all the usual stuff. Because of such, I've been to a wedding today, followed by handover from parents with daughter who had meltdown, who was upset, who did not want a shower, but we were confident she'd have a shower. She did not have a shower. She'll be having one in the morning. And that was very, very stressful. That has then led me to not being able to listen to one of the two records that we're talking about this evening.
No, yeah, I'm good. I'm good, man. Don't worry. I'm a teacher that doesn't have to go into school for like another 3 weeks. So
Yeah.
if I didn't listen to these records, Jack, it would be such a gargantuan failure on my part. Let's be honest. For you, it's perfectly acceptable. For me, I'm living like a borderline homeless degenerate. So there's no reason why I can't just sit myself through a couple of hours and listen to some records and write some notes. It was quite nice to be productive. I even planned some lessons today. I also made the first we had this conversation a couple of days ago. Bought a blender, very exciting. Made the first unhealthy smoothie this evening as a bit of a reward.
Me for it.
It's decadent is the best word to describe what's about to happen in
I swear
here.
to God, if you put tomato ketchup in it, I'm going to be
No,
furious.
no. It was all dessert. It was all dessert. So I have these like Magnum type ice creams, but there's the Aldi version, do like a chocolate orange version. So I'll cut some of those into slices, put those in the bottom. Added to that, a Pop Tart, some chocolate covered Oreos, peanut butter, milk, Malteser milkshake, and some crunchy spread, and blended that and drank it like a smoothie about half an hour
How's your
ago.
tummy? How's your tummy?
Ask me in half an hour, dude. Ask me in half an hour. So far,
We'll wrap this up.
so far, it's like I've just lived an afternoon like I'm in a member of Motley Crue because I am flying right now, bro. Like coffee granules in the brain right now. Going really, really well. Gonna crash hard in like 45 minutes. There might be some tears. But it's fine because I've got to have an early day tomorrow. So it'd actually be ideal if I just had like a grisly nap just at like 11 p.m. this evening. But
Yeah, that's not a nap, mate. That's fucking bedtime. You
yeah,
realize that?
yeah. I thank you. Thanks, Dad. But yeah, so that's what I do when I've been left to my own devices. So you just tried to parent, and also good for you. We both know if I came back from a wedding and had to do a podcast, what state I'd be in. So the idea that you've come back and you're able to like speak, function, um, pay compliments, stand up straight is really phenomenal. So let's get this show on the road. We're supposed to be talking about two records today. One of them, the artist of which I will be speaking to tomorrow, I was recording this Wednesday, the 17th of August. I'll be speaking to Joe Appleford tomorrow evening, about 7 o'clock, 7:30, discussing the album. Now, just a little bit of background. Joe Appleford is a singer-songwriter. He's a former member of a band called Bad Sign. He was a band of that 6 years. This band that he's formed now, which is really solo record with a sort of backing band with him. The PR notes compared it to Black Keys and White Stripes. He says he's been inspired by Motown. The producer of this record has also worked with Creeper, Boston Manor, and Trash Boat. So there's a lot of like weight to sort of the comparisons going on here. Of all of those names that I mentioned, specifically the PR comparison, Black Keys, the White Stripes, the references to Motown throughout some of the stuff, and the fact that the producer produces massive pop chorus bands such as Creeper and Boston Manor. Did you hear any of those in Joe Appleford's music?
Yeah, I mean particularly Boston Manor, the way in some of the stylings and generally the composition of stuff. I could hear that Boston Manor, maybe a little bit of Trash Boat, sort of when it leans less towards the kind of heavy rock and more towards the sort of alternative, rock stylings. But for me, I think one of the biggest comparisons for me was probably Alexis on Fire, and sort of
Interesting.
some of the direction that they've taken and the way that they'll style the music that they do now. But yeah, absolutely. You can hear that in you can kind of feel what Joe Appleford and his band were trying to kind of pull together, and it's no surprise that it had a real finesse to it, doesn't it? It's got a real clean, polished, full, expansive sound, hasn't it? So
Yeah, I think what really, really struck me for what is an emerging artist is how professional this sounds and how quick this sounds very quickly. He's a talented boy, isn't he, Mr. Appleford? There's a lot going on. I said so patronized. He's probably older, bigger, and stronger than me. And I'm like, good for
I
you.
actually
You
think
wrote.
he's our age.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm
at
pretty
least
sure
this
he's
is
sort
his
of
peer.
yeah. I'm pretty sure he's like sort of just around. I read somewhere in the press notes him being the age of 28 at some point recently. So yeah.
Yeah, so really got no excuse for speaking to him like Neville Longbottom. But he's such a talented bloke, and you can hear a real versatility in both his voice and some of the riff work here, some of the songwriting. I kind of got a Don Broco if Don Broco weren't just horrendous human beings kind of vibe. Just like a Don
Or like
Broco for my palate.
right, Don Broco as if they didn't have like a shit sleazy vocalist. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm fully in on that.
Yeah, a
Because
more
because
palatable, less hateful Don Broco. Yeah,
yeah, massively. And
which
I actually
which which
feel
is
that
cool.
that's a compliment, not a slur. Because all the small
No,
bits you like about Don Broco that you wish, yeah, I wish I could like that, but I can't because you're a bunch of, oh wow, I almost went really unprofessional then.
you were going to
Um,
say a word that nobody should say on a podcast, weren't you?
I wasn't gonna go that far. I wasn't gonna go that far. We're not fans of Don Broco. That's fine. They still exist,
I'm not
unfortunately.
even fans of
Um,
Don Broco either. So like,
wow.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
sure.
sound. But yeah, so I agree in the sense that so many great riffs and moments on here. That's like this really sort of bouncy alternative rock. It's really powerful, type punchy kind of sound. I really enjoyed this album, Jack. But give me your general thoughts before we jump in on a track by track basis.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, so I put out a review of this on Noizze today. So I liked it so much that I actually picked up a review of it, and that doesn't often happen anymore for me. But it was really refreshing and really you know, it's right up my street in terms of sound and stylings and the kind of combination and the way that it's been put together. Um, and I gave it well, I mean, that might give a bit much away, but we're already saying we love it. I gave it an 8 out of 10 on Noizze. Not that we do scores on here, but just to kind of, I was really taken by it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I think it's a really, really solid rock album. And I didn't expect it to sound this sort of versatile as well. I think one of the things
Mm,
that you tend to get with solo records from singular artists is that it tends to sound samey. Like, just to draw a comparison, Beartooth, the last Beartooth record, which isn't a solo, which what be strange because it isn't a solo artist, but really is because Caleb Sharma writes everything and he plays all the instruments. Just under
yeah.
the pseudonym Beartooth. It's essentially a solo record. A lot of those records do tend to follow a template. When you listen to Corey Taylor's, I think that was CFMT. A lot of that followed the same similar type of blueprint. Sometimes you benefit from having additional musicians to sort of widen the range of stuff that you're producing. And Joe here manages to do that without seemingly any additional songwriting influence. Now, I'll talk to him about that tomorrow, and he might confirm to me, well, actually, it was more of a collaborative process, and I helped with this person, and whatever that might be the case. But I'm going to guess if his name's on the door, the majority of this music has come from him and him alone.
Mm.
And in that circumstance, it's incredibly impressive to look at the opening two tracks here as a really good microcosm for the record as a whole. Dystopian Dreams. It's like a nice, soft synthetic open, hasn't it? It really matches the song title. Lovely, clean riff to open, but also it's very simplistic. It's easy sort of riff to attach yourself to, easily sing alongable, instantly melodious. Really, really impressive. Great chorus. I really like the sort of juxtaposition of two different vocals from Joe. You can hear when he's sort of mixed in the background. I think that's a nice touch. It's a really nice layered rock song. And then you get Silver Lining, which has got this bombastic riff to open, really great drums, but with a pop sensibility and a real huskiness. What are your first impressions on those opening two?
Yeah, I loved the you kind of by the end of Silver Lining, you knew what you were going to get with this record, didn't you? And
Yes.
but not in necessarily in a predictable way, but you already knew that he had two different streams that he could lean on. In terms of the opener, Dystopian Dreams was more of a it built its way through, and it had that fuzzy riff, but it was kind of there was sort of a darkness to it. You're absolutely right. I picked up on the vocals as well, the way he switched from the sort of harsh, gritty cleans to the kind of the more the gruffness, but there was such range there. And it's at that point that I kind of picked up the Alexis on Fire comparison, albeit Alexis on Fire do that with two separate vocalists. And I loved in Dystopian Dreams that his vocals didn't sit at the front of the mix the whole time. They kind of almost phased in and out of that, which I found really, really cool. And then Silver Lining kicks in and it's got that brilliant groove and that bounce and it feels upbeat. And it's like, okay, well, we can do some of that kind of slow, sleazy riffs that are really sort of get stuck in your head, but then we can also do sort of high energy and bounce. And I obviously looked at the press notes quite extensively for the um, the review that I did and that I wrote up, and it talked about him having all of these kind of riffs, ideas, these songs to be able to, and he wanted to be able to kind of, he knew that they were kind of big choruses, big energy, and that sort of expansive nature to them, and that it was actually a conversation with his own grandmother, um, that kind of she said to him, she said, I can see you rocking stadiums one day. And he kind of, I think he put something along the lines of, whether that be the case or not, it was the kick up the arse that I needed. And I loved that. And it was at that point that then he went to the producer and went to Sam Ogden, who is the drummer for Static Dress, and pulled them both in. So you were talking about Beartooth before and how Caleb Shomer will kind of, he has a band and he has people around him, but decides to do it all himself. And then sort of, he's very much in control of that. Whereas what Joe's done is take the ideas that he's less confident with, and actually out of the ashes of his previous band, Bad Sign, and then crafted something by bringing in people that he trusted to kind of, and I think it's actually really bold and brave of him to, one, put it out on his own name, and two, to be so ambitious on a debut record. I just find it pretty astonishing that he's kind of had the confidence to take some of these really sort of raw feelings and emotions that he had, some really sort of sensitive topics that are close to him, and put them out in an album, but also then trust other people to bring in their influence to it. Interesting choice to put it out under his own name, because you kind of can't help but see it. Oh, is this a side project? Or it's very much the spotlight is on one person, isn't it? But it absolutely works. Yeah.
I would agree. I would agree. I think there's a lot here to really, really sort of like. There's a lot here to sort of really be impressed by. I think that comes with the one of the highlight tracks for me, which was Leech, the next track. I think I really, really enjoyed this tune. Felt more of an indie song in the opening, that staccato drum beat knocking through. Nice riff that kind of reminded me of like pre-controversy Lost Prophets tunes in the night, and almost like Maximo Park and Block Party and those kind of like late 2000s indie bands that were really popular, man. A bit of Hard-Fi for those who remember Hard-Fi. And it kicks in after that though with this really thick guitar tone that prefaces the chorus, and that was really, really enjoyable as well. Immediate stadium rock, really anthemic, really highlighted there, and I was a big, big fan of that. I think there's so much of this album that's sort of perfectly suited to radio play. I could imagine hearing this on the Radio 1 Rock show. I can imagine people playing this while at the gym or going on drives and that type of stuff. It's got a kind of accessibility to it that I think is really going to serve Joe well. And I agree with you in the sense the vocals don't always take the shine in the way that you'd expect from a solo artist, where you'd expect that sort of that central vocal to really sort of come to the spotlight and come to the fore. That doesn't take place. He definitely becomes part of this overall um, sort of the overall layering and the texture of the whole of the music as a whole. And it's really, really impressive. You look at the rest of the record, just to sort of go through some of my thoughts here. And I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly. I'm going to go Ionian forever. Snaky, like a rhythmic riff, really enjoyable shifts in tempo, very singable main figure, really lovely solos, a great chorus on here. Songs like The Escapist and Green and The Fugitive are, for me, like relatively sort of album filler tracks, but at the same time, they're still all, even the floor of this record is still really simple, catchy, with a really great groove to it. I think there's so much of this. Even the songs that may pass listeners by in comparison to some of the others are still really good in their own right. And then you've got what I would expect more of the album to have been, to be frank. When you hear a single person's name, I think ballads, I think acoustic songs, I think clean guitar. And that's what Last Orders was. Really nice vocal combo, really fades and kicks in with the lovely layers of vocal later on. And the same with Utopian Nightmare at the conclusion, which I thought was really, really lovely. The harsh and falsetto chorus is there, the album and song of some real depth. And then obviously you had those sort of modern stadium rock comparisons in Mount Back Blues and Love and War. I think in the second third of this record, it does fade a touch. I think it's front loaded with some of the better rock songs, which is typical. And it does follow a blueprint with sort of maybe the second third of the rock songs really going further down. I think, um, songs like Love and War, The Fugitive, and Green are here and there for me, relatively interchangeable, but that's okay. They're still at their floor, like I mentioned, they're still really, really terrific rock songs. And I think this is an album of real depth, real versatility, and gives Joe a lot of scope for whatever he's planning on sort of doing in the future. You can absolutely see this in nightclubs, and you can absolutely see this at festivals, and you can absolutely see this in O2 Academy sized venues at the very least. In the next album or the next couple of albums. I think this guy's got a lot of potential. I think this album's really, really good for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think just in general, and you've kind of picked out a lot of the highlights that I myself loved, but just to touch back on some of the ones for me, yeah, I absolutely loved Leech. You're right, the scrappiness at certain parts. It felt a little bit like, there was parts of it that came out of nowhere that felt a little bit like lightning in a bottle. And then you had some of the more sort of mainstream stylizings. I could really see the influence from producer on The Escapist. But I loved, sort of the way he came across vocally. And I think by the time you talked about Last Orders, and by the time it came to that point in the album, it didn't. I think it wouldn't be right to say that it had been one tracked, but I think I was looking for something else. I'd seen little sort of intonations in some of the other in some of the other songs that such as Green, for example, there was that little falsetto in the chorus. It was just a really nice little touch that I noticed and felt, oh, that does something a little different. This track feels, on the whole, more upbeat, a little bit more fun. It's kind of had that sort of riffy halftime outro to close. That was really cool. But by the time we got to Last Orders, I kind of just thought I needed this. I needed to hear Joe at sort of a different pace, and I was all at that point longing to hear him, and it was that stripped back, took some of the other stylings away, because the riffs are so fuzzy. It does feel quite heavily layered, and that's not a negative thing. But I was kind of like, I really want to hear what Joe can do, vocally at this point. And you do there. It's him at his most vulnerable. It's him talking about, I think, addiction. That slow building pace, it felt like something a little different. And you talked then about Mountback Blues and Utopian Nightmares, which is the closer. And it just feels like those last two songs, I mean, both of them are over 5 minutes. They both felt slightly more expansive, like either the group or Joe felt like they could be more creative, not have to consider putting it into a sort of a time scale, so to speak, or having to kind of stick to your 3-minute radio play type thing. And it felt like they could be more, like you had on some of the Alexis record. And they kind of weren't afraid of having big instrumental sections that slowly sort of came to a crescendo and then ended. And I love that. I mean, particularly in Utopian Nightmares, where it was kind of started stripped back and then it pulls in, bit by bit. There's the inclusion of instrument, and it kind of feels like more of a big, heavy ballad in a sense. And the outro was massive. It very much felt like a closer. And in Mountback Blues, there was those two sort of instrumental sections where did some really interesting stuff, and it shook it up nicely right towards the end of the record. But yeah, as a whole, I think it's you dig beneath a little bit, and it's lyrically vulnerable, and that gives it a bit of substance, a little bit of depth. But as a kind of a takeaway anyway, it's meaty. It's absolutely what it says on the tin. It's stadium sized arena riffs, and yeah, I just think it's a brilliant combination and a really ambitious debut record. I mean, delivering this as a debut, I mean, the sophomore could be really special, and it's kind of like a bit of a very expansive and a very generous taster palette almost for what potentially, if this was Joe feeling somewhat vulnerable and putting a new project out, or there was any sort of tentative nature in doing so, well, I dread to think what it's like when he's got a bit of confidence behind him, because we could be onto something really, really good. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. It's a great record.
I would agree. I think this is a really solid first step, and I think you're right in identifying that the sophomore record could be really, really, really interesting in terms of the versatility and the variety and the depth that he could go. Excuse me, that he could go into over the course of his career. Quite clearly got a lot of talent, and it sounds like he's only beginning to tap into it. I think this is really, really interesting. It's not often that you find a solo artist that plays this kind of music. It's usually band-based stuff, so I think this is really, really cool. I think good for him for sort of striking out on his own. I think good for him for changing stylistically what he's doing and sort of striking out in this manner. I don't think there's any reason why he can't be a real success moving forward if he continues in this same vein. It's clearly sort of paid off, especially getting this record off the ground so quickly. So really good for him. I'm looking forward to discussing it with him tomorrow. I assume it'll probably be on this podcast or the next podcast, the next couple of podcasts at the very least, maybe attached to this one.
It'll be on soon. Yeah,
It'll be on
absolutely. And
soon.
it'll be on soon. And Joe Appleford is out on tour at the end of the month, I believe, with good friends of the podcast, El Muno.
Oh, love that. Absolutely love that. El Muno can do no wrong, as far as I'm concerned. So that'll be a wicked thing for everybody involved. So moving forward, Jack, you haven't listened to Heilung, but I know that you know sort of the kind of group that they are. For those who haven't had any knowledge of Heilung, I'm just going to give you a few phrases that I'm going to take from the PR notes, from Google searches, from the few bits and bobs that I found out over the last couple of days. They describe themselves as the Enigmatic Ritual Collective. They were formed in 2015. They described their sound as amplified history, which I thought was insane. But then I listened to them and I was like, yeah, it actually is amplified history. That makes a ton of sense.
Spot on.
Yeah. Their band members aren't called band members. They call themselves the composers. Their lead composer, one of the lead composers, is a man who's called Kai U Faust. They described this album, and when they were talking about writing this album, they said, and I quote, "Our attempts to tame it were fruitless," which sounds like really threatening. Their first album was called Ofnir in 2015. Their second album was called Futha in 2019. They've also appeared on Game of Thrones and Vikings. That is their music, not the band members themselves, although that wouldn't surprise me either. So all of that information collectively should give you, the listener, an impression, of what kind of group we're talking about here, Jack. I would characterize this band as a periodical music, is probably fair to say, sort of like the metal equivalent to sort of like, not quite like Downton Abbey, but like in the way that Downton Abbey produces drama in the 19th century and is a spotlight on that type of society. The Heilung produced music that is representative of primordial society and is a musical harking back to that age. Am I somewhere in the right ballpark based on your own experiences?
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. And so I haven't listened to the new album. I think I've heard a couple of the singles, but I actually got into them at the time of, what did you call it? Fufa?
Fufa, yes, 2019's Fufa.
I feel like I've butchered that, but yes, that's the album that I listened to, and it would be no surprise to you, Sam, that I listened to that because I watched Vikings and absolutely loved it, and obviously was a Game of Thrones fan. Yeah, they're like, for anyone that would know, the kind of, I think the most popular or the most well-known band in this genre is Wardruna, who you might have heard of, and I think particularly since the last season of Vikings came to a close, Wardruna were featured so heavily on that. You've seen them kind of more and more on British lineups, and there's been more of a calling for that sort of music just because it's been in the kind of popular zeitgeist, so to speak. And Heilung actually kind of tailed onto the back of that. I remember that Metal Hammer did covers. I can't remember whether it was at the start of this year, end of last year, or it was a 2021 thing. They did these 5 covers with different artists on that they said were kind of big up and comers, and I think Heilung were one of them. And it's just because there's not a lot like them, is there? And I think the difference between them and Wardruna is Wardruna have some kind of, it feels lighter. They don't necessarily tap so much into the darkness of the time, but in terms of some of the ways that you explained that Heilung kind of view themselves, or the way they try to view making music, particularly I remember in Fufa, there was, you could hear sometimes there was just these long drawn out instrumental sections of just what sounded like bones rattling, and then sort of sporadic distant screams and different sort of chants, and it's really, really interesting. It makes really, if you haven't, yeah, well, I think you won't have heard anything like it, that's for sure. I mean, you imagine sort of, if you have watched any kind of scene from Vikings or whatever, the sort of scenes that they might play over, it would be more of the darker moments, the kind of the and it puts you in a weird place, actually. But talk me through Drif. That's the new album. Is that much of the same? And from what I've explained there, is that what you're going to get on this record?
Yeah, if you're expecting instrumental jazz, that's not what's going to happen. No.
Nope.
It absolutely follows the atmospheric sounds of the Nordic times pre-Jesus's birth. It feels like that's the vibe that we're going with. I get the impression that the band don't see themselves as a band; they see themselves as entities that are the vessel of this sort of pre-modern civilization. There's lots of references to the Middle Ages, the Bronze Age, and really it's the atmosphere and the sound of that time rather than really to call it music is even a bit of a stretch because the word music implies compositions and structure, and there's a lot of this that isn't necessarily structured in a very traditional way at all. It's probably more bestly described as a collection of sound. For those
I
of
kind of
go on, sorry.
yeah, I no, I was just going to say I kind of viewed it as a score, a music score,
Yes,
and
it
that
is much
helped
closer to
me.
that. Yeah, that's the best way to
it,
do it.
it
Yeah,
it sort of almost helped me to digest it because I was listening to it waiting for structure, and you're absolutely right. It's more like music to match scenes and to build imagery and to kind of, you know, yeah, and it's no wonder then that it would play over certain scenes of shows like Vikings because you wouldn't find it on the soundtrack, you'd find it on the score. Do you know what I mean? That
absolutely.
it's that kind of, that helped me to sort of digest it, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's fair to say. So in that sense, to review it as a piece of music in the same way that we talk about a band is frankly fucking irrelevant. And it's just best to talk about it as a historical accompaniment. This is kind of the music that would be in the background of a history podcast with a narrator, with this music sort of going on behind. But they actually delve into a more spoken word element on this album in comparison to some of the ones that you've been maybe referring to. So it starts off really beautifully. The song Asja, Asja, is just beautiful. Really, really nice, sort of sung female-led melody with just some strings behind it. It is just gorgeous. And the same follows on Anoana, I think that's correct, with some rotated vocals in male and female speakers and lots of guest speakers here. There's like a group clan kind of vibe to it. Clan spelled CLAN for our American listeners, don't get frightened. And really lots going on. The one where it gets particularly atmospheric and particularly dark, and some would say even bleak. And I say some would say I would say bleak, because the third song is a song called Tenet, and it's 13 minutes and 5 seconds long, and opens with a child reciting what I can only assume is the Scandinavian alphabet, um, without accompanying music, which for about 40 seconds is fucking terrifying, weirdly. Um, and then it kind of builds up as we go on when there's like a kind of dance instrumental going on behind it while the chanting is going on, which then becomes vaguely inspiring. Like you kind of imagine running towards something, maybe achieving something, probably stabbing something at various points. It's really quite an impressively textured record. As the album goes on, we get a lot of it delves them really very much into a spoken word traditional Nordic collection of sounds, including the 8 minute 26 second Kelton Trower, which has a spoken word intro in a language I can't name, and there's shouting and distant marching, like military boots on the ground, kind of distant marching. Um, Obviously, the language barrier in itself is a tough sell in terms of actually trying to decipher the meaning. It it adds to the authenticity of the sound, but from a listener standpoint, it is difficult to get your head around. for large portions, just hearing something in a language that you are, or because I'm not entirely sure if it's like modern day Norwegian. It could be knowing this band, it could very much be like ancient Celtic, as far as it could be. Don't know what we're doing here. And then it kind of shifts gears a little bit, like on the song Nesso has like an Eastern feel with some haunting vocals. Buslas Ben and Nick Hal is really just chanting for about 9 minutes. That's the best way I can describe it. And then finally, a song that you'd enjoy would be the closer Marduk, which opens with the same man who was doing the spoken word earlier. This time he's whispering, because of course he is. And it feels very Lord of the Rings because there's like a bell going on in the background accompanying the whispering. You know the bit at the start of the Fellowship of the Ring where Galadriel is speaking, but she's right at the start, that whispering that happens absolutely at the beginning. When she talks about legends become myths, myths become all that type of stuff. There's that vibe to it. It's really atmospheric. If I was listening to us in earphones, I think I'd shuddered hearing some of that because it is the guy who's just like right in your ear, like sort of whispering like this. It is insane, but incredibly atmospheric, beautifully put together, really layered. What I will say is that you have to be a very particular audience member to seek this out. I would assume that you'd have to be incredibly interested in traditional Viking and Nordic history to really get the most out of this. Bit of a history nerd or a history buff, or someone has a deep layered interest in hearing the authenticity of that sound. If you're expecting this to be like, I mean, because in a way, someone will be like, oh, so like a Monomarth, they do traditional Viking music. Not at all like a Monomarth. No, 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 no. This is like the 15 seconds at the start of a Monomarth album before the riffs kick in. The whole album is like that bit. So it's very, very different. This is like when you're playing Assassin's Creed and you're on the boat and they should start singing. It's like that, like sea shanties and stuff. But there's a bit of that. Like that is genuinely what's going on. Now, in terms of a listener experience, I've heard very little like it. And I mean that as an incredible compliment because for its genre, going to go on a limb and say this is the best type of music of this type I've ever heard, and certainly as authentic as it could possibly be. It's an incredibly impressive and incredibly atmospheric record. It's quite an interesting listen.
And it's that authenticity that I think is the sell. I think it's the right time for the, you said you have to be a very specific niche crowd for it.
Yes.
I think just it's the time where there is a niche crowd for it. And I think that's why it kind of finds itself. Yes, it's probably more, you'd have to describe it as like worldwide sort of Scandinavian influence, like you said, periodic music. And I don't even know if metal comes into that. It's metal in its dark, stylistic nature. It's grim, it's bleak.
Yes.
But it's not. But can you imagine a live show of this? Man, that would be insane.
Yeah, I agree. It's metal in the way that Rain is metal, So just to close off on that, I want to say thank you to everybody that listened. Thank you to the band Heilung. Thank you to Joe Appleford. Look forward to speaking to you tomorrow. So thank you to everyone that's listened to it so far.
Okay, coming up now is my interview with Joe Appleford. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Noizze Podcast, part of the Noizze Podcast Network. I've got the incredibly talented Joe Appleford with us this evening. Joe, how are you, sir?
Yes, very good, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
That's phenomenal. I'm well. Honestly, I'm very, very good, despite the fact that the weather appears to be sort of cascading downwards. My mood is sort of going in the opposite trajectory today, so I'm feeling pretty good. So let's talk about the new record, your first debut album, your first solo record. You're in a band Bad Sign for 6 years. This was quite a brave move to move away from a band in a completely different genre. I imagine quite a entrenched support network of people that you've known for a long time and really do this on your own. At what point did you make that decision? What did it put to you like that decision become clear to you that was the right thing to do? And how did you actually go about first creating this music for yourself?
When I first sent the demos to Neil Kennedy, who was like the producer for the record, and he's a friend as well. As soon as he sort of gave me the nod and said that there was something in it and that we could make something special, then that just put the wind in my sails, really, and I just put my head down, started to figure out all the other elements that I had to do, And yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to do this type of music for ages, to be honest. And you know, when I got the opportunity to like start writing solo stuff, I originally started writing this, you know, sort of acoustic singer-songwriter type stuff, but then ultimately it didn't really sort of, I didn't vibe it enough. So yeah, just plugged in the guitar, fuzz pedal, octave, and just started writing these hooky riffs, and then yeah, just started building some songs, and here we are, you know.
Yeah, of course. What prompted the decision rather than joining a band and being Joe Appleford, lead singer of X group? Why
Mm.
why riding solo? Why that decision?
Um, I'm quite a I'm quite a single-minded person, and I really don't. I'd had enough of consulting other people, to be honest. You know, like when you're in a band, it's a very democratic process.
Yeah.
You know, and I've just had enough of that. You know, when you're solo, you just write what you want to write. Neil, my producer's the only person that can sort of veto things or say, "Hey Joe, try this," or because I really trust him on that level. And also, I just thought if I'm going to do something and I am going to give music another crack and under my own steam, like my own name, not hide behind anything, you know, just be out there and put myself out there for judgment, shall we say? But yeah.
No, I completely understand that. So you mentioned the relationship with Neil, the producer. How
Mm.
does that work as a songwriting standpoint? Because I'm always curious about this process. Do you write the songs
Yeah.
completely yourself and then come to Neil and it's like a tweaks and touches kind of situation, or is it more of a collaborative process in the studio for you two?
It's yeah, it's tweaks and touches really, and it's like fine tuning. You know, I bring the songs. We do like a pre-production week where we just sit, run through the songs, run through the lyrics, talk about the importance of the connection from the lyrics to the music, and then also figure out like what do we want to add in above and beyond. So for the record, you know, I wrote everything apart from the drums. The drums were written and performed by Sam Ogden, who's in Static Dress. And yeah, Sam's a good mate. So, but everything else is written by me in terms of like the string arrangement, you know, brass arrangement, guitar, bass, everything else. But then Neil came, you know, he came to the table with a lot of, you know, interesting production ideas, especially vocally. He really pushes me to find like different levels within my vocals and try different things that I wouldn't have thought about. So yeah, he's very important to the process.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely imagine that. There's a lot of listen to the record, which is great, by the way. Reviewed it this week, and
Thank you.
there's no, it's a pleasure. And there's a lot of sort of layered vocals there. There's sort of circumstance, especially on some of the softer tunes, where you're singing like a kind of a falsetto, like a softer kind of vocal melody, and in the background it's you again, sort of this harsher, rawer type of stuff. When you
Yeah.
put these songs together, is that a decision that's part of your initial songwriting? Does that happen later on? Was that something that you sort of touch on? I think, oh, actually, I could echo it there. We could do a bit of a call and return here. Or do you actually write different sets of lyrics and see it that way?
Yeah, so I tend to write the most of the vocal ideas, and then Neil will also make it something that's another level from what it was, and particularly like it's quite like a stripped back. It's the stripped back song on the record, if you will. You know, originally that was just guitar and vocals, and then he had this idea to bring in these like almost like Bit Crush, Nine Inch Nails type drums that come in like when it on the last chorus, because he's like a massive Nine Inch Nails fan, and he just sort of heard that, and I never would have heard that as an example, really. So, and it added an extra dynamic, and I love the fact that we could use electronics in, you know, dotted in the right places. It's a little bit like the use of strings, like we weren't too gregarious with it, but we used it in the right way in the right places, I think, and it gives extra dynamic to the record, and yeah, ultimately I think that's how we want to approach things. We just want to make each song as good as it can be and take time over it as well, you know?
Yeah, of course. There appears to be a lot of versatility in this record musically. I like the the opening of the album's like this sort of alternative, almost like you mentioned in sort of the PR notes we got said, you can absolutely hear the Black Keys influence and the White Stripes and things like that. And a lot of these sort of more alternative, sort of scratchy kind of, like you talk about the fuzz pedal and those sort of like those sort of bands, it's really sort of key through that. But also we've got a sense of, like you talk about, there's some synthetic elements, there's some really sort of almost ballad type songs near the second half of this.
Yeah.
When you wrote this album, was there kind of a theme that ran through it? I know you've described it a bit of a concept record, musically or lyrically, or was it, all right, these are the 12 best songs I've written in this 8-month period, and they're going to just be pieced together, and this is the way that it's gone? Or did you think about the album's construction as a whole here?
Yeah, it was definitely meticulous, like in terms of, I got together, a bunch of songs, then sort of, whittled them down to the 12 that are on the record, then went through pre-production with those, with Neil, and then I had the title for the record before I wrote any lyrics, Dystopian Dreams Utopian Nightmares. So I built the lyrics off of that concept, really, and then the first and last tracks are bookends lyrically as well. And when you listen to the record, you'll probably notice that there's a lyric from Dystopian Dreams that is the final lyric at the end of Utopian Nightmares as well. So I love concept records. I love circular themes. I love like a reprise, if you will. I love something coming back and your ear sort of goes, hold on a minute, I heard that about 48 minutes ago. What's that? But each track had because the lyrics are, I'm taking on like a character in each song type thing. It worked that way musically as well. Like the first track to me is like a mashup of, Bullet the Blue Sky by U2 and Led Zeppelin, something like When the Levee Breaks. It's got that, but then it's also got this like Alexis on Fire type vibe as well, like the softer, more grandiose parts of Alexis on Fire. So I think I wanted to blend the album between like all out, fun rock music that you can move to, but also sprinklings of, more tender moments, more grandiose moments, particularly the opener and the closer. I always feel that you should structure an album like a set, come out big, hit them hard, the first few tracks, then, have the part in the middle where people can really appreciate the vocal and open up, and then finish strong as well, So that's how I approach albums, like I approach a live set in terms of construction. Just a bit more time and whatever else, but yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I've got a couple of questions there because I'm an English teacher, so you talking about writing about characters has already made me excited. So when you talk about some of your lyrics, some of those appear to be personal experiences, but you've mentioned just that you sort of write in the adoption of a character. Is it like a blend of the real and the metaphorical when you write these lyrics? So, like, to draw an example, there's a famous Bruce Springsteen anecdote. We wrote the river about his brother. But he takes on the character of his brother while he's going through this kind of hardship. But there's that combination of it being figurative and then it also being an actual experience that he went through. Is that similar to where we're talking with yourself?
Yeah, so the album started, the characters are obviously people, either people that I've encountered or, experiences that I've been through, or I've seen people go through. A lot of it is observational. The bulk of the record is observational. Different for me because in Bad Sign, it was all very personal, like really personal songs.
That's interesting. You say observation. There's a lot of mentions here about sort of societal themes, ideas. Actually, the title of the album is Dystopian Dreams, Dystopian Nightmares. It's the most journalistic cliche Piers Morgan-y type question I'm going to ask you today. But is any of the last 18 months, the pandemic, the cost of living, the war, any of that, the general misery day to day sort of affecting our world at the moment, has any of that played into any of your songwriting?
No, not really. No, because I think the best songs either encapsulate, moments in time, or they encapsulate, things that are recurring themes, and good or bad. And that's what this record has. All of the themes encapsulate, relationships or interactions with people, or interactions with events that are for good or bad sake, they can be recurring. There's obviously some more. I guess the most topical track is probably Love and War, which I guess explicitly talking about that constant state of inertia that's sort of portrayed through the media. You know, they're constantly demonizing sectors of people in one breath, but then glorifying people in another breath that have really strange ideals. Homophobia is, for example, is still prevalent in a lot of mainstream media. And it's racism, same thing. Transphobia, and I think that those subjects, for me, now's the time to sort of push past that. We should be way past that type of thing. And when I sort of see these things reoccurring, talking about relationships and things like that, I think certain subject matter like racism, homophobia, transphobia, etc., you have to be explicit, in a sort of Rage Against the Machine style, just out there in your face, like. And so, yeah, I was sort of blending those two songwriting styles as well a little bit on the record.
No, I think that's the best way of doing it, really, isn't it? It's sort of making sure that, like you say, that if you've got a political standpoint, to make that as loud as possible. There's almost like an obligation that artists have to really have that bravery to be able to spread the message. And we talk about those live performances. So you've got this band put together. How did the band come together? What was the thought process behind the selection? And how are preparations going for performing these songs that you've constructed solo, and now they're having to be a collaborative process? How's that going?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I've only actually played 4 shows, but they've all sort of grown strength to strength. In particular, 2000 Trees, that was our 4th show. There was a guy down the front that had printed his own merch, like bootleg merch.
Wow.
There was people come. Yeah, it was absolutely insane. I couldn't believe it. We didn't even have that in Bad Sign across all of the time we were touring across Europe and all sorts. So, and the reaction, just people coming up to me every day, because I stayed the whole weekend, sort of saying, "Oh, we saw you. We saw you on the first day, and we really loved the set." I think it just sort of, it gave me a boost, to be honest, because there's been a lot of difficulties throughout this project as well. A lot of letdowns from various people that were involved at the start and then pulled out, But I was never going to be swayed, never going to be stopped. So if a plan changes, I'll just put my head down and crack on, So, but yeah, for me, selecting the band was all about, firstly, it was about friends, so people that I knew I could tour with. So I just contacted friends that were really, really good players and said, "Do you like the record?" Sent them the record. They liked the record. I said, "Look, I can't pay you, at the start, because there's no money in it at the start, but I guarantee the project will take serious shape in the next couple of years. We will achieve exceptional things, and I'll make sure that as the money rises in the project, the money will be going straight in your pockets." So that's a solemn promise from me to sort of take the boys in the band with me on the journey as well, and build a. We're all really good friends. We all know each other's families, so building that community. You mentioned Bruce Springsteen earlier, E Street Band. Yeah, it was about friends and then brilliant players, and yeah, it's working really well so far. And we got 3 guitars, so it's a very powerful live setup, very full on. And yeah, man, just can't wait to just play more and more shows, more festivals, etc. next year.
Yeah, that's a really exciting proposition moving forward. Now that as we're recording this, the album is due out tomorrow, right? So this is what I'm imagining. Is it incredibly nervous or exciting time? You're about to sort of really put this project to the test and sort of see this cathartic thing that you've gone through and see how the public actually react to it. You mentioned a little bit of that with the 2000 Trees performance, that you gave that little bit of a boost, right? How are you feeling on the eve of the album, expecting that kind of what is obviously going to be a critical response, positive or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who says that they just write music for themselves is lying. I think otherwise
Yeah.
you wouldn't leave your bedroom, right? You'd just write music, you'd
Mm.
listen to it, and you'd never release it into the world. The truth is, I want as many people as possible to like this, and I want it to, hit as big an audience as possible. But at the same time, I'm a realist. I understand that not everyone's going to like it. That's just how music is. But I think for me, I want to get it out there and I want to use it as a vehicle to keep strengthening the project. More shows, as I say, more festivals, just start leveling up. I mean, I started writing this album, sort of nearly 4 years ago, really. If we look at the timeline, nearly, it's about 3.5, something like that. So, and I've already finished the second record, and the second record's nearly completed production and all the rest of it. So I'm excited to get this record out, let it hit people like a truck, and then literally next year I'm coming again with another output, and it will be even stronger, and each record will be stronger than the last, and yeah, just to be honest, I'm not nervous. I just feel absolutely unstoppable at the moment. That's that's just how I feel. I don't see any sort of rivals like in a similar space, like solo artists. I don't think rock's really got any strong solo artists. Not really, not that I'm picking out. Not today. Song wise, anyway. I think there's fantastic frontmen, like Frank Carter and stuff like that. And but yeah, on the whole, I think I'm carving out my own lane. So people are going to like it or not like it, but I think more people will like it than dislike it. That's my gut feeling. So I'm just putting my head down
Yeah.
and putting out quality music. That's the only objective I have, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all you can do. It's your responsibility as an artist. That's interesting as well that you talk about that the second record is already done. So
Yeah.
so is this a 2-part album? Are they completely different? Were they linked at all? How did the decision making process go with this will go on the first record, this will go on the second record? Because I'm assuming some of those writing sessions have got to have overlapped.
No, because what a lot of people do with records is they write a bunch of songs, they do pre-production, and then for the next record they might return to the songs that didn't make the first record and see if they can polish them up, and maybe they'll make the second record. I just binned the songs that didn't make the second record. Like, I don't even remember what they were. If they weren't good enough for the first one, then they're definitely not going to be good enough for the second one, because the second one, if this album's an 8 out of 10, the second one's got to be a 9 or a 10. That's the mentality, and I'm so proud of this first record in every way, because it's me sort of finding my sound and my identity and breaking out of the trap, so to speak. But the second record is, yeah, it's unreal. Even just. Yeah, I listened to it and I think other people have written it. I've really pushed myself for the second record. So I'm so excited to just keep going and keep stretching the boundaries of what I'm doing, really.
That's interesting. So even this doesn't sound like a podcast for the second album, but is the second record like different? Is the second record different then? Is it more expansive, more versatile, braver, that type of stuff? What could we expect?
Yeah. I mean, sonically, still the bulk of what I do will always have that rock theme, and that the core of it will be rock music. But there's tracks where we were working on them, and Neil said it sounds like Prince meets Rage Against the Machine type. It's very groove. Yeah, it's very groove laden. I'm a big fan of stuff like Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars, and I love that Silk Sonic project they did where they sort of brought that 70s thing back, and I listened to like a lot of Lauryn Hill, and so I'm incorporating all sorts of stuff for this. One of the big records I've been listening to the last sort of 6 months is that Little Sims record. So I'm taking a lot of influence from different places and just trying to level up and just write better songs, and also I'm trying to To be honest, yeah, I see the music as a competitive landscape. That's how I see it. The consumer's got so much choice at their disposal, so many different bands, so many different artists, and we're here competing for space. So that means I've got to make the best record possible. I've got to make the best live show possible. Um, and if I'm supporting someone, I'm not just there to make numbers. I'm here to give the headliner a hard night. And if someone's opening for me, I will always select top support acts, not just people that are going to give me an easy night. So yeah, I just constantly want to be challenged, and I want to challenge others, and I want to make a big impression. With every show that I play, every festival I'm at, and every record I release. I'm not here to make up numbers and just be in the background. Even though obviously this project's fairly humble beginnings, in 5, 6 years' time, you and I will sit down again and it will be very, very different. I know that for a fact.
That'd be utterly fantastic. I'm going to get you out of here on this, and this is the final one. I read in the notes. Not only have you got a second album in the books, you've got a plan for 4 albums in 5 years.
Correct,
Is that accurate? So can you just? I'm not asking for the Wolf of Wall Street kind of. Here's the flow chart. Here's how we're going to make all this money and all that sort of thing. But have you already got like game plan for like the next 3 albums, like in the next 5 years? How does that work exactly?
I mean, at a simple level, I already have like the title of each record. So I already know how the concepts like link between each other. I have like mini goals for each record. That change, that like with this record, those goals change because at the start of the project, to be candid, I had certain people involved that could have expedited my journey to certain goals that I had at the time. Those people decided to leave the project and basically bottle it, which is fair enough. That's all right. I'm not unprofessional. I won't name names and bullshit like that. But ultimately, those people decided to pursue other routes and other artists and all the rest of it, which is their prerogative. But I said to one person in particular, like, you will regret it because all you've basically done is fuel me. I'm such a driven person in general life anyway, but when someone like shows me that they don't believe in me, it just steps me up a level, and it just makes me more bullish and more determined. And so that's why I'm planning for constant output. And the constant output model, it really comes from me stepping back and looking at the music industry, particularly rock music, where like a band, they'll put out 2 or 3 singles, put out the record, they try and put out more singles post record release, and the truth is people don't give a shit. Once the record's out, you listen to the record, even if you really love it, there's so much choice now that if you don't release output consistently to a high standard, you will be forgotten about. That's just how it is now. And I sort of, it sounds mad, but I looked at someone like Rihanna's career. If you look at that first sort of 6 to 8 years of Rihanna's career, it is just relentless output. Now, listen, on a completely different scale in terms of budget and all the rest of it, but the principle is the same. Relentlessly good output that elevates time after time. Each release is better than the other. The marketing steps up, the image steps up, everything. So I'm already planning, everything to that sort of meticulous level, and things are going to happen, and like they have done with this record, and they'll try and throw me off course. That's just life, but I will not be thrown off course, and I have clear targets in my mind about headlining Brixton within this time frame, headlining the O2 in this time frame, as an example, Madison Square Garden within this time frame, and it will all happen, and it will all be achieved, and it's not a matter of if, it's just when. That's all it is.
Wow.
Well, that is one of the most forthright, assertive, and lively interviews I've ever had over the last couple of years. I look forward to what's going to be the Sign of the Times Part 2 featuring Joe Appleford in the next 18 months, based on the description of the second album to come. Just want to say thank you for your time, my man. I really appreciate you giving us a chance to have a chat, and I look forward to the next conversation that we have, hopefully from both of our beachfront mansions, as you just forward my media career and I'll forward your music one, and we'll do the best we can for each other. But in the meantime, it's been an absolute pleasure. I want to say thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, again. Sam. Appreciate it, mate. And
been a pleasure.
I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan, so I wish you zero luck at the weekend when we give you a good hiding.
Mate, if you play for the first 89 minutes against Chelsea, I'm not scared at all. At all. That's all I'm saying. All right, buddy. Thank you so much.